Welcome to Book Summary Podcast, your gateway to personal transformation. Each episode delivers big ideas from the world's most impactful books on mindset, productivity, and success, all in just a few minutes. Ready to turn knowledge into action? Let's get started.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a source that's definitely made some waves, really challenges how we think about living a good life.
That's right. We're looking at excerpts from Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F.
Yeah, and if you've ever had that thought, like, maybe trying less hard could actually lead to more, or, that maybe leaning into the bad stuff is actually the way forward, well, then this is probably for you.
Exactly. That idea is really central here. The material we've got covers some big human themes: suffering, what we value, responsibility, even how we deal with, well, death.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack the core ideas in these excerpts, pull out the really important stuff. We want to understand what Manson really means by being selective about what you care about, what he colorfully calls your fucks.
And why that selectivity is supposedly key to finding meaning, maybe even happiness.
Yeah, because it's definitely not about just being indifferent, right? It's not apathy.
No, not at all. The argument is it's about figuring out what's truly worth investing your limited energy in, finding what's genuinely fuck-worthy, to use the book's term.
Okay, let's dig in. There's this fascinating paradox right at the start, and it uses the story of Charles Bukowski to make the point.
Bukowski. Yeah, the source doesn't pull any punches describing him. Alcoholic, womanizer, gambler. Basically a deadbeat poet for, 30 years?
Living this meaningless blur, as the source puts it, just, drifting and destructive. Then when he's 50, this small publisher sends him a letter.
Someone who apparently just had a weird soft spot for this drunk loser offers him a contract, a real shot.
And Bukowski's response, classic. He basically says, look, I can stay at the post office and lose my mind, or I can try writing and starve. I choose starve.
Yeah. He signs the contract, quits his job, and then supposedly knocks out his first novel, Post Office, in just 3 weeks.
And the dedication. Dedicated to nobody. Just perfect.
And he actually became really successful after that. Novels, poems, sold millions of copies. The typical story you hear is, the underdog narrative.
Right. He never gave up. He persisted. He believed in himself, all that stuff.
And this is the twist the source highlights.
Yeah.
That's not really the core message Bukowski himself seemed to embrace.
Because what's actually carved on his tombstone? Just 2 words.
Don't try.
Don't try.
So what does that mean? Well, Manson's interpretation, based on the source material, is that Bukowski's success didn't come because he tried to become some kind of winner. He wasn't. It came because he knew he was, in many ways, a loser.
He accepted it.
He accepted it. He owned that uncomfortable truth about himself and wrote with this, brutal honesty from that place. His genius wasn't in overcoming his flaws, but in being totally comfortable sharing them without hesitation or doubt. He wasn't trying to be someone he wasn't.
He was just him, flaws and all.
Exactly. Which leads directly to this idea the source calls the backwards law.
Okay, the backwards law. It sounds backwards.
It is. The idea is that actively pursuing a positive experience often creates a negative one. And, conversely, sometimes embracing a negative experience can lead to a positive outcome.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about the gym. You actively seek out the pain of lifting weights or intense cardio, right? That negative experience generates the positive outcome of health and strength.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Or business failures. They suck. They're negative. But going through them, learning from them, that negative experience often gives you the understanding you need for future success.
So being open about your insecurities might actually make you more confident. Or confronting difficult things builds courage.
Precisely. It's this weird flip. Pursuing the positive backfires, embracing the negative generates the positive.
So if not giving a fuck works in reverse, why is giving too many fucks so bad? Why does caring about everything lead to problems?
The source argues that when you invest your energy in caring about everything, every little annoyance, every opinion, every outcome, you develop this subtle or maybe not so subtle sense of entitlement.
Entitlement? How so?
You start feeling like you're perpetually entitled to be comfortable and happy at all times, like the universe owes you smooth sailing.
And when things inevitably don't go smoothly.
Exactly. You see adversity as an injustice. Challenges become personal failures. Minor inconveniences feel like huge personal slights. Disagreements feel like betrayals.
That sounds exhausting.
The source calls it a kind of sickness, trapping you in this petty, skull-sized hell. You're constantly frustrated because the world isn't catering to your expectation of constant ease and happiness.
And this state of mind, this constant caring about everything, it fuels something called the feedback loop from hell.
Yes. This is a really key concept. You feel anxious, and then you get anxious about feeling anxious.
Or you feel guilty, and then you feel guilty for feeling guilty.
Or sad about being sad. Like
Right.
layering negativity on top of negativity.
The source has that great internal monologue example.
Yeah. I do the feedback loop all the time. I'm such a loser for doing it. I should stop. Oh my God, I feel like such a loser for calling myself a loser, and it just spirals.
Ugh, fuck, I'm doing it again. See, I'm a loser. Ark!
It's perfect.
And that loop happens, the source says, precisely because you give too much of a fuck about the fact that you're having a negative experience in the first place. You judge the feeling itself as bad or wrong.
So wanting to escape the bad feeling so badly actually becomes the bigger problem?
That's the core of it. We're taught feeling bad is somehow wrong, something to be fixed immediately. So when we feel bad, we feel like we're failing at life, which just adds another layer of misery.
Okay, so if caring too much is this skull-sized hell, and the backwards law points another way, how do we figure out what is worth caring about? How do we choose where to invest our limited fucks?
Right. That brings us to what the source calls subtlety, #2. And it's crucial. To not give a fuck about adversity, you first have to give a fuck about something more important than adversity.
Okay, unpack that. Something more important.
Think about the example the source uses of the elderly woman absolutely losing it at a cashier over a 30-cent coupon.
Yeah, why get so worked up over 30 cents? The source suggests that for her, maybe there isn't much else in her life that feels significant, or that she feels she has control over. She might be lonely, dealing with health issues, worried about finances, and that tiny conflict over the coupon becomes the only thing she can focus her frustration and energy on.
Because she doesn't have something bigger, something more important, demanding her attention.
Possibly. She cares intensely about that small thing, perhaps because there's a vacuum of bigger things to care about.
Yeah.
Makes you think, what trivial things am I getting overly invested in? And is it because I'm avoiding something more fundamental?
It points towards maturity, doesn't it? The source talks about how we get more selective as we age.
Yeah, experience tends to teach us that a lot of the stuff we obsessed over when we were younger, awkward moments of what random people thought just, doesn't matter in the long run. It had little lasting impact.
You start accepting yourself more, maybe you realize you won't be a rock star or cure cancer, and that's okay.
Exactly. The source actually describes middle age as potentially liberating. Your energy might dip, your identity solidifies a bit, you accept your flaws more readily. You just don't have the bandwidth or the desire to care about everything anymore.
You save your ever-dwindling fucks, as the book puts it, for what really counts: family, close friends, maybe your golf swing.
And the surprising result of this simplification, this focusing, is often a more consistent sense of happiness.
Yeah.
You're not chasing everything anymore.
It loops back to Bukowski again, doesn't it? Don't try to care about it all, be deliberate.
Which highlights what the source calls today's psychological epidemic. This pervasive belief that it's somehow not okay for things to suck sometimes.
Oh, that feels so true. The constant pressure for positivity, for everything to be great all the time.
And if you buy into that belief, then when things inevitably do suck because life involves suckiness, you blame yourself. You feel like you're the problem, inherently flawed or broken.
Which can lead to trying to numb that feeling, right? Shopping, drinking, whatever works.
Yeah. Or just constantly trying to overcompensate. And that, of course, just cranks up the feedback loop from hell again.
So this not giving a fuck approach isn't about numbness. It's about recalibrating how we relate to difficulty. It leads to what the source terms practical enlightenment.
Yeah, forget the floaty, airy-fairy idea of eternal bliss. Practical enlightenment, in this view, is about getting comfortable with the basic truth that some suffering is always inevitable. Life includes failure, loss, regret, death, period.
The story of the Buddha before he was the Buddha really hits this home.
Right, the Prince Siddhartha. Grew up totally sheltered, then saw suffering for the first time, sickness, old age, death, and was horrified. He blamed his privilege, ran away, and decided the answer was to seek meaning through extreme suffering.
Starving himself, self-torture, begging.
But after years of that, his big realization was suffering just for the sake of suffering. It just sucks. It's not inherently meaningful or noble without a purpose. His grand experiment was a failure.
And his core teaching became, pain and loss are unavoidable parts of life. Stop resisting them. Let go of the struggle against them.
Which completely undermines the modern idea that happiness is like some algorithm you can solve. If I get X job, look Y way, marry Z person, then I'll finally be happy.
Yeah, the source argues that dissatisfaction isn't a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly. Dissatisfaction and unease are inherent and uncomfortable parts of human nature. And get this, they're actually necessary components for achieving consistent happiness.
Necessary. How can feeling dissatisfied be necessary for happiness? That sounds like something Disappointment Panda would say.
Yes, enter Disappointment Panda. Our hero in the cheesy panda mask and t-shirt that was way too small. His superpower, telling harsh truths.
Okay, lay it on me, Panda.
His truth is, we suffer because suffering is biologically useful. It's nature's preferred agent for inspiring change.
We evolved this way. We're wired to be dissatisfied.
Pretty much. Dissatisfaction and insecurity drove our ancestors to innovate, build, survive, strive. We're wired, the source claims, to be dissatisfied with what we have and satisfied only by what we don't have. That discontent pushed humanity forward. Pain isn't a flaw. It's a feature.
Physical pain teaches us obvious lessons. Don't touch fire.
And psychological pain works similarly. The source mentions the brain registers emotional pain, like heartbreak, almost like physical injury. It's a signal that something's wrong, an imbalance, a limit exceeded.
So the pain of rejection or failure, while awful, actually helps us learn, teaches us not to make the same mistakes.
That's the idea. It's necessary feedback, which raises the question. What happens when we try too hard to shield ourselves, or society tries to shield us, from all these uncomfortable but potentially useful doses of pain?
We lose the benefits, become disconnected.
The source argues yes, and we turn to numbing behaviors, addiction, avoidance, which just delays the inevitable confrontation with problems and often makes it much worse when it finally happens.
Okay, so if emotions are just feedback, sometimes misleading, and suffering is useful, how much should we trust our feelings?
Well, the source clarifies their purpose. Emotions evolved as feedback mechanisms, signaling what's likely beneficial or harmful for survival and reproduction. Loneliness nudges you to connect. Happiness rewards taking good action.
And this feels critical. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. And feeling bad doesn't automatically mean something is bad.
Exactly. There are signposts, suggestions, but crucially, not commandments. We need to question them, evaluate them, not just blindly follow.
And trying to just squash negative emotions, that backfires.
Completely. You shut down the feedback system you need for solving problems. If you deny the pain, you can't address the cause of the pain, you get stuck.
What about the relentless pursuit of happiness itself? Is that flawed too?
The source argues yes, because emotions are inherently fleeting. Whatever makes us happy today won't necessarily work tomorrow. Our biology craves novelty, demands more. So fixating on achieving happiness becomes this never-ending pursuit of something else, the next goal, the next high.
And you end up feeling kind of the same, inadequate, even after achieving things.
Yeah, that's the hedonic treadmill idea. You're always striving to change your situation, but your baseline level of happiness doesn't really shift much. You're running hard just to stay in the same emotional place.
It shows that basing your self-worth purely on achieving a constant state of happiness is probably a losing game.
Definitely. It's a setup for dissatisfaction.
So if chasing happiness is a trap and emotions are just signals, what should we base our worth on? How do we define ourselves meaningfully?
The source offers a different metric. You are defined by what you're willing to struggle for.
So it's not just the destination, it's the journey, the effort involved.
Precisely. The source shares a very personal story about his own dream of being a rock star. He'd fantasize for hours being on stage, the adulation, the whole deal. He was totally convinced it was just a matter of time, had a plan and everything.
Why didn't happen? Why not?
Because, he realized later, he didn't actually want it enough. He loved the idea of the result, the glamorous outcome, but he didn't love the process.
The grind.
Yeah, the daily grind, the source details, the endless practice, the band politics, booking gigs nobody comes to, hauling heavy gear, dealing with broken equipment. It was a mountain of a dream, he says, but it required a mile-high climb, and he just didn't enjoy climbing.
So real success, lasting success, isn't just about wanting the prize. It's about finding value, even enjoyment, in the struggle itself.
That's the argument. The people who make it, the athletes who love the burn, the entrepreneurs who thrive on the stress, the artists who embrace the uncertainty, they succeed because they value the process, the struggle. It's not just willpower. It's finding the right struggle for you.
This connects to the source's pretty harsh critique of the whole high self-esteem movement and that character Jimmy.
Oh, Jimmy, yeah. Presented as this super positive, always hustling guy, but the reality described is, well, a total deadbeat. Living off others, all talk, zero follow-through.
But he felt good about it, right? Had this delusional level of self-confidence.
Totally. Anyone who questioned him was just ignorant or a jealous hater. He completely believed his own bullshit, as the source puts it.
And the source links this attitude back to the high self-esteem movement that started in the 60s, based on research showing a correlation between self-esteem and good outcomes.
Right. But policymakers then made the leap to assuming that boosting self-esteem would cause those good outcomes, which led to decades of things like great inflation, participation trophies, everyone being told they're special and exceptional, regardless of actual effort or achievement.
But the source is blunt. The data is in. We're not all exceptional. Just feeling good about yourself doesn't mean anything if it's not based on something real.
In fact, the source argues the opposite, that facing adversity and failure is useful and necessary for developing competent, resilient adults. Constantly telling kids they're amazing no matter what just risks creating more Jimmies, entitled lacking accountability, disconnected from reality.
The description of adult Jimmy is pretty grim. Delusional founder, smoking pot daily, yelling at partners, maxing credit cards, spending all his time talking about success instead of struggling for it.
And the warning is clear.
Yeah.
The disconnect can't last forever. Reality must hit eventually, and the longer it's delayed, the more painful it might be.
Okay, so if fake unearned self-esteem is bad and we should define ourselves by struggles we value, how do we figure out which struggles are worth it? How do we know our values? This requires looking inward, right?
Deeply inward, which brings us to the concept the source calls the self-awareness onion. It's presented as a metaphor for digging down to understand yourself.
Layer 1 seems pretty basic, just like recognizing your emotions. I feel angry, I feel happy.
Simple, surface level. Layer 2 is harder, asking why you feel those emotions. The source stresses this takes time, maybe even therapy for some people to really get there. Why angry? Is it because you feel you failed at something? Why lethargic? Maybe deep down you don't feel good enough? This layer starts to uncover your underlying assumptions about success and failure.
And layer 3, that's the core. The source calls it full of fucking tears.
Yeah, that's where you hit your fundamental personal values. This is about asking, why do I consider this specific thing a success or failure? How am I choosing to measure myself? By what standard am I judging myself and everyone else?
And this is critical because
Because your values determine the nature of your problems, and the nature of your problems determines the quality of your life. If your core values, your fundamental metrics are messed up or unhelpful, then pretty much everything downstream, your thoughts, emotions, actions, problems, will be out of whack too.
But the source says most people are really bad at honestly answering these why questions about themselves.
Yeah, it's hard to be objective. You might say you value X, but your actions show you really value Y. You might feel lonely and blame others, but digging into the why might reveal its link to your own values or behaviors.
The example of the guy and his distant brother is really illustrative here.
It is. Layer 1.
Yeah.
He feels hurt. His brother doesn't call much. Layer 2. Why does it hurt? Because it feels like failure. We're brothers, supposed to have a good relationship. So we see the value, good brotherhood, and the metric he's using, frequency of contact. That metric makes him feel like a failure.
Then layer 3 digs deeper. Why are brothers supposed to have that kind of relationship? Because family is important. Why? Because being close is normal and healthy, and I don't have that.
See, he's comparing his reality to some external standard of normal, maybe seeing other families, and concluding something must be wrong with me because his doesn't match.
But the source suggests maybe he could choose different metrics.
Exactly. What about mutual respect? Or trust? Are those present? Maybe those are actually better, more meaningful metrics for his specific relationship with his brother than just counting phone calls.
It doesn't mean the distance doesn't still hurt, right? The source acknowledges that accepting reality can be painful.
Absolutely. No sugarcoating. But the point is, the objective situation matters less than how you choose to see it, measure it, and value it. Problems are inevitable. The meaning you assign to them isn't. You control the meaning through the standards you choose.
The contrast between Dave Mustaine from Megadeth and Pete Best, the original Beatles drummer, really drives this home.
Yeah, it's powerful. Mustaine, kicked out of Metallica, apparently chose his metric for success as being bigger than Metallica. So despite having a huge, successful career, he felt like a failure for decades by his own standard.
Whereas Pete Best, who arguably missed out on way more fame and fortune by being fired just before Beatlemania,
He went through hell initially. Depression, attempted suicide. But years later, he said he was happier than he would have been with the Beatles. Why? Because getting fired led him down a different path where he met his wife, had kids. His values shifted.
he started measuring his life differently.
Exactly. Fame would have been nice, sure, but he decided family and a simpler life were ultimately more important to him. He found value in what he gained by losing the superstardom based on the metrics he chose later in life.
It really highlights how powerful our chosen values and metrics are in shaping our experience of life.
And the source explicitly calls out some common values that tend to be problematic that lead to poor quality problems.
Okay, like what?
First, pleasure as the ultimate goal. The source calls it a false god. Chasing only superficial pleasure leads to anxiety and instability. It's easy to get, easy to lose, constantly marketed to us, often used just to numb ourselves. It's needed, sure,
Right.
but is not by itself sufficient.
Makes sense. Second,
Material success above all else. Prioritizing money and status symbols often leads people to compromise more important values like honesty or compassion. Measuring yourself by what you own tends to make you shallow.
third one.
Always being right. Our brains are flawed, biased machines. We're wrong constantly. Needing to always be right prevents learning, blocks empathy, closes you off from new information. It's better, the source argues, to assume you might be ignorant and stay curious.
And the last one mentioned?
Staying positive, always. About everything, it sounds nice, but it's delusional. It denies reality, prevents you from actually seeing and solving problems. The source uses some dark humor examples like reframing a job loss or infidelity as just great learning opportunities to show the absurdity.
Yeah, refusing to acknowledge the negative doesn't make it go away. It just prevents you from dealing with it.
Right. These are all values that seem appealing on the surface but often lead to more suffering because they're poorly chosen metrics for a good life.
This seems to lead naturally into another really challenging core idea from the source: responsibility.
And specifically, the idea that you are responsible for everything in your life, even the things that aren't your fault.
Okay, that sounds tough. Explain that. The source uses William James, the psychologist, as an example.
Yeah, James had a rough go despite being born wealthy. Terrible health problems his whole life, near blindness, chronic pain, stomach issues. He was isolated, failed at school. His art wasn't valued.
His father pushed him into Harvard Med School, but he felt like a total fraud there. Couldn't fix his own problems. How could he fix others?
He dropped out, went on an expedition, got smallpox, ended up alone and sick in South America, made it back home, totally broken, a failure in his family's eyes, nearly 30, depressed, suicidal.
And out of that low point came this huge realization.
According to the source, yes. The realization was we are individually responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances.
Whoa. But we don't choose so many things. Our genetics, where we're born, accidents.
Right. And the source clarifies the crucial distinction. You don't control what happens to you. You always control how you interpret what happens and how you respond to it. You can't not be responsible for your experience because even choosing not to interpret or respond is an interpretation and a response.
So if a piano falls on your head, obviously not your fault. But how you deal with the aftermath, the pain, the recovery, the meaning you make of it, that's your responsibility.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from blame, which is often external and past focused, to agency, which is internal and present future focused. The source flips the Spider-Man line. It's not just with great power comes great responsibility, but maybe more importantly, with great responsibility comes great power.
Meaning, the more you accept responsibility for your life, including your problems, the more power you actually have to change things.
Exactly. Accepting responsibility is the first step towards solving the problem.
The source contrasts this with the guy who blamed his height for his dating failures.
Yeah, he was smart, interesting, good-looking, but totally convinced no woman would date him because he was short. He blamed all women for being superficial, claimed he had no choice. He wasn't taking responsibility for his own mindset or actions.
And the key confusion there is mixing up responsibility and fault.
Yes, people resist taking responsibility because they think it means admitting fault. But they aren't the same. You can be hit by a drunk driver, totally not your fault, but you are immediately responsible for dealing with the injuries, the insurance, the emotional trauma. Fault is about the past event. Responsibility is about your present choices in response to the event.
The source shares his own experience with being cheated on. That must have been hard to write about.
Extremely. He was miserable for months, and he blamed her entirely for his misery. But that didn't help him feel better because he couldn't control her. She was at fault for cheating, yes, but she wasn't responsible for his ongoing emotional state. He was.
And when did things shift for him?
When he accepted responsibility for his own emotions and well-being, he chose better values for himself, self-care, focusing on his own life, instead of waiting for her to somehow fix his pain.
And looking back, he even saw his own contribution, his own faults, and how the relationship played out.
Yeah, he realized he wasn't just some innocent victim. He'd ignored warning signs about her character, his fault. He'd been arrogant and neglectful himself, his fault.
His faults didn't excuse her cheating, though.
Not at all. But by taking responsibility for his part, his mistakes, he learned from them. He could ensure he wouldn't repeat those patterns, wouldn't overlook those signs again. He gained power over his future relationships by owning his responsibility for his past actions and choices within that dynamic.
This applies even in the face of terrible tragedy, right? Like being a victim of a crime.
Yes, it's unequivocally not your fault, but the responsibility for managing the fallout, emotional, physical, legal, falls on you.
The example of Malala Yousafzai is incredibly powerful here.
Phenomenal. Taliban bans girls' education. She speaks out at 11, keeps going to school, shot in the face at 14.
And her choice, even then, identifying herself, then surviving and choosing not to be silenced.
Exactly. She could have understandably retreated, said, I can't, I have no choice. That would have been her choice. But she chose the opposite. She took responsibility for her response to that horrific event, and it amplified her voice, her courage, her impact. Being shot wasn't her fault, but her response was her responsibility.
The source mentions getting pushback, like from a grieving father who felt blame for his pain. But the point isn't about fault for the event, is it?
No, it seems the concept is about acknowledging your agency in how you interpret the event, the meaning you make, and the choices you make moving forward, even amidst terrible undeserved pain. It's about owning your inner world's response.
This avoidance of responsibility connects to what the source calls victimhood chic.
Yeah, this cultural trend may be amplified by social media, where claiming victim status, even over small things, gets rewarded with attention and sympathy. It becomes easier to push responsibility onto others.
And outrage porn, media fanning the flames.
Right, finding minor offenses, broadcasting them, generating outrage, then broadcasting the outrage, creating these cycles that distract from bigger issues and polarize people.
Taking responsibility even extends to things like genetics, like the OCD example.
Yes. The teens with OCD weren't at fault for having the disorder, but therapy focused on helping them take responsibility for managing it, for recognizing the disorder's values weren't their values, and choosing more important values for themselves, like not hiding or leaving the house.
It comes back to the poker analogy. You don't choose the hand you're dealt, but you are responsible for how you play it.
It's a simple concept, the source concludes, but really, really hard to actually live. Accepting responsibility often means facing uncomfortable feelings, inadequacy, fear, anger. But those feelings are just inevitable side effects of growth, of choosing better values.
And if we're taking responsibility for our inner world, that includes our beliefs,
Yep.
which leads to another potentially uncomfortable idea we're probably wrong about. Well, most things.
Yeah, it's a big one. The source argues we're wrong about almost everything, constantly. But so is everyone else. Progress isn't about achieving absolute certainty or rightness. It's about gradually becoming a little less wrong over time.
The random button experiment sounds fascinating. People inventing complex rituals.
To get random points.
Yeah.
Psychologists set it up so points were awarded randomly, but people instantly started creating these elaborate theories and sequences, stand on one foot, touch the wall 3 times, convinced they'd crack the code.
And the point is?
How incredibly fast and easily our minds come up with and believe in a bunch of bullshit that isn't real. We're apparently wired for it.
Why? What's the brain's problem?
2 main issues, according to the source. 1, it's imperfect. We misremember, misinterpret all the time. 2, it's biased. It desperately wants to make sense of things, so it clings to the meanings it creates, even ignoring evidence that contradicts them.
Like that Emo Phillips quote. I used to think the human brain was the most wonderful organ. Then I realized who was telling me this.
Exactly. The takeaway is that most, if not all, of our beliefs are flawed to some degree. Our mind is a jumble of inaccuracy. Accepting that is step 1.
Which makes the next section heading pretty stark. Be careful what you believe. It gets into false memories.
Yeah, and the very real dangers. The source uses the story of journalist Meredith Moran and the repressed memory phenomenon.
She went through therapy and came to believe her father had sexually abused her based on supposedly repressed memories, confronted him, told everyone.
Yes, and it wasn't isolated. This was happening a lot in the 80s and 90s, accusations based on recovered memories, some later proven false, plus those unfounded satanic ritual abuse panics. Why then?
The source explains memory isn't like a video recording, it's more like the telephone game.
Right, it gets distorted, bits get added or changed, gaps filled in with each recall, influenced by our current feelings and beliefs. Our brain prioritizes a coherent story now over perfect accuracy about the past.
So if your relationship with someone sours, you might reinterpret past positive memories through that negative lens.
Definitely. And in Moran's case, the source suggests the context was right for a false memory. She was unhappy, had difficult relationships with men, was angry at her father, researching incest, and crucially, had a therapist actively looking for repressed trauma. Her mind, seeking an explanation for her suffering, potentially invented false memory to create coherence.
It allowed her to make sense of her pain, maybe fit a victim narrative, avoid other difficult questions about her life.
That's the suggested mechanism. The tragic result was hundreds wrongly accused, lives ruined. Suggestive therapy plus sensational media created an environment where minds were incentivized to create narratives that fit, even if untrue.
Which brings us to the danger of the opposite. Pure certainty, being absolutely convinced you're right.
The source tells a wild story about a woman named Erin he met at a self-help seminar.
She seemed smart at first, but then, red flags, asking him to move in immediately, suicide threats when he broke up.
Yeah. And then finding him years later, drunk at 4 p.m., claiming she'd cured her cat's kidney stones with energy tapping, and insisting she could cure death itself, if only he'd be her boyfriend to help her.
Wow. But the realization wasn't just that she was crazy.
No. He realized she was a hardcore self-improvement devotee who had taken all the lessons, visualize, persist, act, be positive, have high self-esteem to an extreme. She had absolute, unwavering certainty in her beliefs and methods.
And that certainty is linked to negative behavior.
Yes, the source references Baumeister's research again, that often the perpetrators of terrible acts feel good about themselves. Their high self-esteem, despite reality, gives them justification for hurting others.
It takes unwavering certainty in your own righteousness, your own entitlement to do horrible things.
That's the argument. Racists certain of superiority, fanatics certain of divine approval, abusers certain of their right. Evil people never believe that they are evil, the source says. Rather, they believe that everyone else is evil.
The Milgram experiments also showed how easily normal people follow orders to inflict pain when given moral certainty by an authority. Certainty is dangerous.
It connects back to Manson's law of avoidance. The more something threatens your identity, the more you avoid it. Certainty feels safe. Success and failure can be scary because they might force you to change who you believe you are.
Like the artist friend who never launched his website because being an artist nobody likes felt scarier than staying an artist nobody's heard of. Certainty, even in mediocrity, felt safer.
So the antidote is cultivating uncertainty, learning to be a little less certain of yourself.
How do you even do that? The source says it's hard.
The step one is asking yourself frequently, what if I'm wrong? Use the example of the brother judging his sister's fiancé. He thinks he's being helpful, but asking, what if I'm wrong, might reveal his underlying insecurity, jealousy, or entitlement.
Because we're terrible observers of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Often the last to see our own motivations.
Exactly. Cracking that armor of certainty requires questioning how wrong we might be. The Aristotle quote fits perfectly. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Being able to evaluate different possibilities, different values, without instantly adopting or rejecting them is key.
Applying "what if I'm wrong" to the brother might reveal his assumption that he knows best, that he's entitled to judge her life.
And admitting that kind of stuff hurts, which is why few people do it. But it's necessary to get at the root of problematic behavior.
There's another key question proposed as a litmus test.
Right. Would being wrong create a better or a worse problem than my current problem for both myself and others? This helps evaluate if your values are solid or just self-serving neuroses. If it always feels like you versus the world, the source suggests, it's probably more like you versus yourself.
Embracing uncertainty, the possibility of being wrong, that opens you up to learning, to growth, which seems related to the next section, embracing failure.
Yeah, seeing failure not as an endpoint, but as part of the process. The source starts this personally, too, describing graduating college in 2007.
Terrible job market, right. Lost money, ended up crashing on a friend's couch. Felt like a total failure from the get-go.
But he reframes this as fortunate. Why? Because he hit rock bottom early on. The thing many people fear most, starting over, failing big, he experienced when he had nothing left to lose.
So the idea of starting his own online thing wasn't that scary.
Compared to already being broke and couch surfing? Not really. If it failed, he was just back where he started. What was there to lose?
This actually shifted his values. The real failure became not trying, not pursuing his own thing. Being broke wasn't the failure anymore.
This leads into the failure-success paradox. Think of Picasso dashing off a valuable sketch. That skill wasn't magic. It came from thousands of tiny failures over years. The source argues the magnitude of your success is based on how many times you've failed at something.
So if someone's better than you at something, they've probably just failed at it more times than you have.
That's the perspective. Like a baby learning to walk, they fall constantly, but don't conclude, walking isn't for me. They just keep trying, because the value is inherent in the process of learning.
This ties back nicely to process-oriented versus goal-oriented values.
Exactly. Better values are ongoing processes, like expressing myself honestly. You never finish being honest. It's something you continually practice.
Whereas goal values, graduate college, buy a house, lose X pounds, they provide limited happiness. Once achieved, the driving force is gone.
Right. They're useful short-term, but they don't provide ongoing direction or growth. Achieving them can even lead to that midlife crisis feeling, because the problem that drove you is solved. And the source contends that growth itself generates happiness.
Picasso stayed successful because his underlying value, honest expression, was an endless process, not a finite goal. It kept him creating.
And the idea that pain is eventually where his process is reinforced by that study of WWII survivors in Poland.
Kazimierz Dabrowski's study, people who went through horrific trauma, starvation, bombings, Holocaust experiences.
And yet, a significant number felt those experiences actually made them better people, more responsible, grateful, happier. They saw their pre-war selves as petty and entitled. The suffering somehow catalyzed positive transformation.
It's a difficult idea to grapple with, which might be why we get stuck asking how. The source calls these VCR questions.
Yeah, like when he was a kid, figuring out electronics seemed easy to him, just push buttons, plug stuff in. But his parents were baffled, always asking, but how?
And as adults, we have our own areas where we're stuck asking, but how? Even when the steps seem simple from the outside. How do I quit this job? How do I ask them out?
The source gets emails like this all the time. The answer seems obvious externally, just do it. But internally, for the person asking, it feels impossibly complex.
Why? What's the real barrier?
It's usually not lack of knowledge, it's the anticipated pain. Quitting the job is simple paperwork. Facing parental disapproval is painful. Asking someone out is just words. Risking rejection feels terrifyingly complex.
The source admits his own VCR question was social anxiety. How do you just walk up and talk to a person? He had all these limiting beliefs making it feel impossible. His emotions defined his reality.
Which leads to the final principle in this section, the do something principle.
This came from when he quit his job in 2008 to start his business. He was terrified, didn't know what to do.
So he defaulted to playing video games. Avoidance. Until he remembered advice from his high school math teacher, Mr. Packwood.
What was the advice?
If you're stuck on a problem, don't sit there and think about it. Just start working on it. Even if you don't know what you're doing, the simple act of working on it will eventually cause the right ideas to show up.
Action first. Inspiration follows, not the other way around.
That's the principle. Action is always within reach. If you make doing something, anything related to the problem, your metric for success, then even failure moves you forward because you did something, you learned. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction.
This idea of action, embracing discomfort, saying no sometimes, it seems really crucial for relationships too.
Absolutely. The source talks about the importance of saying no, using his experience traveling in Russia.
He said objectively, a lot of it sucked. Food, weather, grumpy people. But it was a favorite trip. How?
He found something valuable in the cultural bluntness. He describes it as a lack of fake niceties, no forced politeness. If something was stupid, people said so. If they liked you, they said so. Directly.
That must have been jarring at first.
Totally. He mentions a girl on a coffee date calling something he said stupid, very matter-of-factly. His Western-coddered mind felt attacked.
But he grew to appreciate it.
Yeah, he saw it as unadulterated expression, Real honesty without the usual social games or trying to be liked. It felt like a kind of freedom, being able to say what you think and hear what others think without fear of catastrophic fallout. Accepting rejection, both giving and receiving.
Travel does that, right. Pulls you out of your own cultural assumptions.
Exactly. It forces you to see that your way isn't the only way. Russia made him question if the constant fake niceness in Anglo cultures actually makes intimacy harder, breeds insecurity.
This leads right into boundaries in relationships. He critiques Romeo and Juliet.
Calls it satire, not romance. Two crazy kids killing themselves isn't aspirational love, he argues. Historically, romantic love was often seen as dangerous. Now, we romanticize drama.
So what's healthy love then, according to the source?
Healthy love isn't about two people escaping their problems through each other. That's unhealthy codependence. It's about two people acknowledging and addressing their own problems individually, but with each other's support.
And the health of the relationship comes down to two things.
1. How well each person accepts responsibility. 2. How willing they are to both reject and be rejected. Healthy relationships have clear boundaries and allow for no. Unhealthy ones have blurry boundaries and can't handle rejection or disagreement.
Can you give examples of poor boundaries?
Like taking responsibility that isn't yours, you should have known I wanted. Or demanding others take responsibility for your feelings. My partner lost her job, I need to fix it for her.
This leads to the victim-saver dynamic.
Right. Entitled people often fall into one of two traps. The victim, who constantly needs saving to feel loved, and the saver, who constantly needs to fix others to feel valued.
And they attract each other.
Like magnets. Their unhealthy patterns fit together perfectly. They often learn these dynamics in childhood, but it's toxic.
Why? Because their needs aren't actually being met.
Exactly. The victim creates endless problems. The saver burns out fixing them. Both are acting out of selfish, conditional needs, not genuine love or support. They chase the emotional highs of the drama.
And healthy partners feel boring to them.
Because solid boundaries don't provide that constant drama fix. The hardest thing for a victim is taking accountability. For a saver, it's stopping the fixing. Both challenge their core identity.
So real love involves sacrifice, but it has to be voluntary.
Yes. Done because you want to, not because you feel obligated or fear the consequences of saying no. No manipulation, no strings attached.
The litmus test is key. If I refused, how would the relationship change? If the answer is a huge drama fest, it's probably conditional.
Which brings us to trust and conflict. The source argues conflict is necessary for trust.
How so?
Conflict reveals who's really there for you unconditionally, versus just for the good times or benefits. You can't trust someone who just agrees with everything. Going through disagreements and coming out the other side is what builds deep trust and intimacy.
So healthy relationships need the ability to say no and hear no. Without that, boundaries dissolve.
Yeah, one person ends up dominating or manipulating. Open conflict, hashing things out isn't just normal, it's necessary maintenance. Avoiding it leads to resentment and toxicity.
This applies strongly to rebuilding trust after a breach, like cheating.
Definitely. If you're cheated on and want to stay, how do you trust again? Just accepting an apology isn't enough. The source argues you failed to question the values that allowed the cheating in the first place.
So what needs to happen for trust to be rebuilt?
The cheater has to do the hard work, peel that self-awareness onion. They need to figure out and admit the messed up values that led them to cheat. For example, I valued my own gratification over our commitment.
They have to own it.
Own the shitty value.
Yeah.
And then they have to demonstrate through consistent change behavior over time that they're actively choosing better values now.
Yeah.
Without that admission and demonstrated change, there's no real basis for rebuilding trust.
And it takes time, right? Longer to rebuild than it took to break.
Much longer. And it's a difficult, conscious struggle both partners have to choose. This applies to any major breach of trust. Step 1, own the underlying values. Step 2, build a solid track record of changed behavior.
The China plate analogy is good. Break it once, maybe fix it, break it again, harder, keep breaking it, it shatters beyond repair.
Trust is fragile like that.
This whole discussion about boundaries, trust, and navigating difficulty leads to another counterintuitive idea, finding freedom through commitment.
Yeah, our culture screams more is better, more options, more experiences, more partners. The source admits he totally bought into that.
But the paradox of choice suggests more options actually make us less happy.
Often, yes. We become overwhelmed, less satisfied with our final choice because we're aware of everything we didn't choose. It fuels anxiety, second-guessing.
Leading to avoidance, never committing to anything to keep all options open.
Which means you miss out on depth. The source contrasts depth versus breadth. Chasing breadth, endless new things, prevents you from experiencing depth, and depth requires commitment.
Some experiences only come from sticking with something long-term, a place, a person, a skill.
Exactly. The source realized in his 30s that commitment wasn't a trap. It actually offered a different kind of freedom and richness. The constant pursuit of novelty has diminishing returns.
So committing to a person, a place, a path actually frees you.
In a way, yes. It frees you from the endless distraction of unimportant options. It lets you hone your focus on what truly matters for your well-being. It simplifies decisions, reduces FOMO. You decide what you have is good enough and invest deeply there.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered embracing difficulty, choosing values, responsibility, uncertainty, failure, boundaries, commitment, all leading to this final, unavoidable reality.
The big one. And then you die.
The source gets intensely personal here, sharing the story of his friend Josh's death at 19.
Yeah, party, Josh, acting strange, saying cryptic things. Seek the truth for yourself, and I will meet you there. The source kind of brushed it off.
Then later, sirens, panic, realizing Josh had fallen from a cliff, found hours later devastating.
He describes falling into a deep depression, profound sense of meaninglessness, faking smiles, feeling numb underneath.
And the dreams about Josh.
Vivid dreams, full conversations. He really looked up to Josh.
Until that one dream in the jacuzzi.
Right. He tells Dream Josh he's sorry he died. And Josh just laughs and asks something like, "Why do you care that I'm dead when you're still so afraid to live?" He woke up crying.
That hit hard. What was the realization?
Staring into that void left by Josh, the endless nothingness, he had this insight. If there's ultimately no grand reason to do anything, then there's also no reason not to do anything. Facing death's inevitability obliterates petty fears, embarrassment, shame, fear of failure. They're all just a bunch of nothing anyway compared to the finality of death. Spending your short life avoiding discomfort is basically avoiding being alive at all.
Josh's death became this clear dividing line, before, after.
He said so, before. Inhibited, unambitious, trapped by what others thought. After, transformed into someone more responsible, curious, willing to try. Still flawed, but now he gave a fuck about something more important than his insecurities.
Someone else's death gave him permission to live. The worst moment became the most transformational.
Which connects directly to Ernest Becker's work, The Denial of Death.
Becker also had a tough life, right? Health issues, career struggles.
Yeah, constantly challenging norms. His core idea, we're animals, we know we'll die, and this terrifies us on a deep existential level, the death terror.
And to cope, we create immortality projects.
Exactly. We construct conceptual selves, identities, legacies that we hope will live forever. Our careers, our kids, our names on buildings, our art, our religions, they're all, in Becker's view, ways we try to deny or transcend our physical death. Our values are often tied to these projects.
And these projects can cause conflict when one group's idea of immortality clashes with another's.
That's Becker's argument. It underlies wars, oppression. Defending your immortality project becomes paramount.
And when these projects fail us individually, when meaning collapses.
Death terror rushes back. Trauma, shame, mental illness can be linked to this. The source suggests not giving a fuck, but the superficial stuff, is a way of embracing impermanence, reducing entitlement tied to these fear-driven projects.
Becker's final realization was even more radical.
Yeah.
That the projects themselves are the problem.
Yeah. Instead of trying to build an immortal self, maybe we should question that self, become comfortable with the reality of death. That allows us to choose values more freely, not driven by fear. A difficult idea, even for Becker.
The source ends with his own powerful experience confronting this. Sitting on that cliff edge in Africa.
Yeah, the southernmost kip. Looking out thinking, what if this is it, all there is? Feeling that primal fear of death, the body wanting to pull back.
But he forces himself closer, edges over, looks straight down.
Describes the intense fear, but also forcing himself to gaze at it, to acknowledge its existence.
And in that moment of confrontation,
He's exhilarated, conscious, alive, laughing with delight.
the point being that confronting mortality directly, while terrifying, can be clarifying.
Immensely. It obliterates all the crappy, fragile, superficial values. Chasing money, fame, being right. They seem insignificant. It forces the bigger question, what is your legacy? What truly matters in the face of the end?
It leads back to that final Bukowski quote.
We're all gonna die. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing.
Powerful. And reflecting on Josh's death again, the source sees it, taught him to seize the day, take responsibility, live with less inhibition.
So, Summing up this deep dive into Manson's ideas, it's really a call to be radically selective, to stop wasting our finite energy, our fucks, on trivial things.
Yeah, and instead directing that energy towards what truly matters by embracing some counterintuitive ideas. The backwards law, the utility of suffering, questioning our feelings, defining ourselves by struggle.
Taking responsibility even when it's not our fault, being less certain, accepting failure, setting boundaries, finding freedom and commitment, and ultimately confronting our own mortality.
It's about stripping away the superficial nonsense to build a life based on more resilient, meaningful values. Resilient because they incorporate rather than deny life's inherent difficulties.
It's a bracing challenge to the constant pressure for comfort and positivity. It suggests strength and purpose come from facing reality, including the uncomfortable parts, and choosing deliberately what's worth your struggle.
So after exploring all that, what really sticks with you?
Well, thinking about that Bukowski quote again. If knowing we're all going to die should free us from trivialities and foster love, what are the trivialities in your own life that are currently eating you up? And what might change if you consciously decided to stop giving a fuck about them and started giving that energy to something truly worthy of this one finite life?
That's definitely something to sit with. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for tuning in to the Book Summary Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, hit that like button, subscribe for more summaries, and share it with someone who's ready to grow. Want deeper insights, exclusive book notes, and reading tips? Join our free newsletter. The link's in the description. And don't forget, if you'd like to read the full book, our affiliate link is right below. It helps support the channel and keeps the summaries coming. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing.